Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we will be looking at a new topic, DTO pattern. DTO pattern is data transfer object, how we will use in our application, what are the use cases, where do we use, and why we need it. DTO is just in transferring an entity data to an object data to Java Beans or Java Pozo. Or you can use different libraries or you can write your own. But today we will be showing how we can write our own instead of using a library. So let's get started and understand what is a DTO. DTO pattern is data transfer object. See how this works. We have a client over here which is a browser. So this can be a client which is a browser. And we have a RESTful API which transferred the data from a client to a web server. So this communicates both the way. Then we have here a customer DTO. So in case we are doing with customer, so it will be a customer DTO. Can be a name, can be a location. Then we have a mapper over here. This mapper, it can be a library or you write your own mapper. But today's video is related to we are not using any library, so it will be a own codes like with the functional programming. Then we have a database over here. Then we have an entity called a user entity, or we have an entity such as a car entity. This can be a name, this can be a model, and this can be a brand. This might contain address, postcode, and password, anything. So the basic concept of an DTO is to transfer an entity data. So what does entity data means? So we have in the database for a user, we have an address, postcode, and password. Now in the API, when we are consuming the API, we don't want to see the password. We just want to see address or postcode for that. If we use in database entity of this object, then if you don't use a mapper, if you don't use a mapper, in that case the whole data entity will be transferred to an client. So sometimes we don't want to export the password, we just want to export address and postcode. Why you want to export the password? Because it's a sensitive data, so you don't want to export. For that we will use a mapper. Now this mapper can be a third-party library. It can be a third-party library, or you can write your own mapper. The main function of this mapper is to hold the data of entity, which will be this. It's gonna just hold the data of entity and it's not gonna expose every data. So it can expose only address, postcode for user, and in case of car it might be name, model, brand, and some other data that we don't want to export. So it's gonna map entity data, which is a database, and it's gonna give us whatever we need. In our case, it's a customer DTO. We need only name and location. We don't need a password, and it will send back to a client. So this is the basic structure of DTO pattern. So there are many different libraries, but one of the libraries is map start. Why this library? Because this library is a reflection free library. Reflection free library means less memory, and the transferring and mapping all the things is a little bit faster than a reflection. So I'm in their official page, so we can use this library, but today I'm not going to teach you what is the use of this library, because we are not using a library, we are writing our own. So on their documentation we can see example. This is a car.java, this is an entity, and car.dto is a data transfer object. So when we have these two entity and DTO, because we don't want to sometimes transfer a sensitive data to the client, so we want to have a custom data to the client. For that, this DTO is used. So we need to create a car mapper, which is basically an interface, and we are saying which class to map and what is the target. So this is how this library is used, but we are not going to use this library. We will show you how we can use without this library. So we will be writing our own entity, but first, before I use a Java function to do that, I will show you how the previous code I have written. So if you can see, this is one of the service called tag, which finds and gives all and delete and create. So when I create one of the tag entity, so it gives me a return value, and I'm doing a map entity to DTO. This is basically a function, and I am creating a tag DTO, which is my custom one, which holds name and messages. Then I have an entity called tag. In the tag I have an object ID and string name. So with this implementation, if I access this value, I can see an ID of name. So this is the own implementation of object transfer object. I have not used any functional programming. So this video is used to convert normal things to a functional programming, how functional programming can help us to map an object to an DTO. So for that, we can create a new package inside this folder, something called mapper. Once we create a mapper, I am mapping a tag entity to an DTO. So let's create a class over here. I will create a record, but it can be anything. So I will say map tag to entity. Now I need to do is as a singleton, because I need to do a dependency injection on this one. So for this I need to implement a function, Java function. For that, what I need a tag, because I'm mapping an tag, which is a entity to a DTO. So this name should be, let's refactor this name, entity to DTO, because we are mapping a tag entity to a DTO. So what we need, because we need a tag and we are tag DTO. So because we're gonna map a tag entity to a tag DTO, so this is the one. So we need to implement one of the method of this one, which comes from the Java function. So over here, now whatever I was doing over here, map entity to DTO. So this was basically a mapping tool. I can copy this one and return it over here. Now, so we're gonna refactor this code. So what I need to do, I need to do a dependency injection of this class. Now once I do a dependency injection of this class, if we check the map method from Java, we can see this is which expect a function of this type. So if we check our mapper, which is implementing a function of this type, so instead of writing this, now we can just write this, which will do the same thing. Yep, so we don't need now this method over here. So same thing we can do for this map and this map. So now everything we did a refactor. So if I run a unit test case, everything should work. So I will revert the code and I will show you how this was working before and after the refactoring how this is working. So all of my unit test case has passed. But if I revert this one, so which was using this one, I will revert back to the original thing. So this was the original where I was. So if I run this again, so everything should pass, but we have refactored the mapper without using a library and Java functional programming, which will be very useful in most of the scenarios. So this is how we will use a functional programming to map without using a library. If you want more content on Micronaut or Angular or micro frontend or microservices, please subscribe to my channel for more content.